Take two. Welcome and good morning. Take two, because for some reason take one actually went so well, and then we realized that the GoPro stopped filming after 27 seconds, so we need to keep our eye on that red blinky light. However, we will do this again, and it'll probably be even more efficient and better the second time around. So welcome, Infamous here, Mr. Notorious with us as well this morning. And it is a brisk morning here in Austin. It is 45 degrees-ish, high of 60 something, which actually is pretty good car working weather.
Yeah, that's true.
So both arrived yesterday, and very excited for Formula One tomorrow, and then SEMA next week. And so we're going to play around with the Stalker Vert today. We are going to install these Raceland Coilovers and try and get the car a little bit lower. And yeah, there's a lot of history about this car and the suspension and the body, interior, everything, because nothing has really not been touched on this car. Yeah, Notorious is down here, and he's been with me every step of the way and has a lot of memories. And what's your main memory of the car?
Well, it was around 2008 after, well, one of the initial builds, I guess you could say, for Performance World. And we actually did disc brake conversion all around. And there's North Race Cars brake package on the back. Yeah. And for some reason, we just couldn't get things to bleed. So actually loaded onto the trailer, unloaded off the trailer in Toronto at Performance World, across the convention center, inside, full of vehicles, and drove the car with absolutely no brakes.
Right. That's a skill.
Yeah.
And yeah, we were talking about how, well, Performance World is like Canadian SEMA. Maybe.
Yeah.
Probably the best way to describe it. Probably a tenth of the size, if even that.
But the caliber of cars is usually quite good.
Yeah, it is
in
good.
a lot of the areas.
We do some good stuff up in the north sometimes. And we were talking about how a lot of things that go to shows, or cars in the shows, don't always reach completion on time. And the Infamous project was, I guess, one of those examples with no brakes. Everything else is pretty much done, but we just didn't have brakes. So it's always interesting when you go around and sometimes you see all these beautiful builds, and they're not all necessarily fully completed for obvious reasons of trying to fight the clock and trying to sort out some gremlins like with any new build. So for today, Raceland Coilovers. So Raceland is a company that wanted to create affordable suspension, and we believe for Euro cars initially.
Yep.
Volkswagen guys, BMW guys, and they wanted to manufacture, cut out the middleman, and make things affordable. So full set of coilovers all around for four corners is usually around $500.
Yeah, right in around there. They did run two different variants of coilovers. I'm not sure if they still have that available, but they did have an upper level and then their entry level as well.
And I think they do, so they do spacers for your wheels. Obviously it's a whole stance game these days. And I think they do like some downpipes and other things.
They have some BMW downpipes for some of the turbo cars back starting E90 chassis.
Awesome. So yeah, this is a coilover right here with us. And essentially this is going to be replacing the strut that's in the car and the coil spring that's in the control arm. So now within the control arm setup, there's going to be no coil at all. And we're going to see how these things ride. Obviously, we're going to be able to have more height adjustment here, which is great. We'll see if we can crank this thing down a little bit lower. The car currently, after a little bit of going back and forth last night and a few beers and so many iterations of suspension history in this car, we believe we have max springs in the front that are cut and no rubber isolators. At one point there were 2-inch drop spindles with a cut spring, and that was too low to one of the owners of the car.
For daily drivability, yes.
Yeah, when before it did its first circle back to me in terms of a buyback. So the history will go through the car at some point this weekend as well. And yeah, so we have our strut housing here with all of our threaded portions of adjustability with our locking nut and the helper spring right here, which is very interesting. You can pull that apart. So on the white BMW, on the infamous project build, that one has Bilstein coilovers in it, and they're the same setup. So this guy is actually just a helper spring and does nothing really other than just keep tension on this guy. So if you like to go really low, you can actually not worry about putting this in. You think we'll put this in?
Might not.
Might not. We might just skip this and just put that on because we're going to be riding somewhere down here. And so it's pretty simple in terms of how it works and how it functions. The top bearing cap here is an interesting component and very important in terms of how it functions, and the little needle bearings inside, which Notorious is going to run you through this because I was thinking, you know, bearings, you want to make sure that they're greased really well. Well, apparently you can over-grease things.
Yes. So this is our upper mount, which is a little different than a normal one. Normally you'd have your studs on the top. It would go into your strut tower and then mount in there. This is a little different than traditional. We'll be a little fortunate because we actually have some caster camber plates already, which are going to aid in installation. And this, when you take it apart, you'll see there is a thrust style needle bearing setup in there. It is greased with a nice synthetic grease in there. We don't want to over grease these things because if there's too much, then when you go to put the lower spring seat on, it will actually push it apart hydraulically, and then you will not actually have your bearings meeting on both surfaces when you are turning.
So there you have it. You can over grease. I was thinking, you know, like your traditional bearing that you put on with your rotor on the spindle, and you're packing that thing so much full of grease in your palm and trying to get as much in there as possible. So good thing you're here, because I probably would have added a whole bunch more grease in there to make sure, hey, keep it greased and lubricated so that, you know, it lasts longer. So
some of it would have made its way out, but then it would have made it around the edge and caused a giant mess.
All right, so good to know.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to drink our coffees and start ripping this car apart. Then we'll move on to some beers and see how we can get the stance on this thing. We're still filming. Good stuff. Let's go. Yes. So for safety, we've chalked our rear wheels. We had to drive the car up on some 2x6s because it's too low on its own. And we'll get the jack under it, get the car jacked up, wheel off. We'll have to pull the brake caliper off, sway bar, links, and what else are we going to do? Unbolt the strut. The Borbet wheels on this car, a lot of people ask questions about them and how, in fact, I managed to get them to fit on this car, as they are actually Mercedes fitment. So you will not find an 18-inch Borbet that is in a Mustang fitment. So Mercedes is 5x112. Our Ford bolt pattern is 5x114.3.
Yes.
And the way I managed to get these to fit, the center bore was smaller than what Ford is. So that actually got machined. So this big center bit here had to get made a little bit larger. Machine shop can do that for you. And then all the holes in terms of where the bolts come through, well, there's these very interesting, what are called PCD variation
wobble nuts.
Wobble nuts. And essentially what happens is that you can see the seat can actually move just a little bit from side to side. allowing it to go, and that's probably 3 millimeters in total. So that's where we make up the difference of the 112 to the 114. And that's how these wheels fit on this car. So in here, we can see what we're going to be ripping apart. I'm going to pull this brake caliper off, and we are going to undo this end link. And then from there, we can undo these two main strut bolts. We will have the jack underneath the lower control arm, keeping pressure so that the spring doesn't come flying out. So this is probably, you know, if you're watching anything proper or professional on TV, no one would ever advise you to do that. You should probably have some sort of, well, we can put like a pry bar or something up through the control arm up into the spring area so that things don't go flying. People have died and lost probably eyeballs and other things like that. So you do want to be careful with what you're doing, but take your time, be smart about what you're doing, and you won't lose an eye. We've removed the brake caliper, strung that up, hung that there so we don't have any tension on our brake line. We removed the top of the sway bar link so that when we drop the control arm, this will allow the link to go down, because otherwise the sway bar is going to hold everything up in place, and the rotor's off because it's got SN95 spindles on the front, so obviously it's a floating rotor setup. And we have our jack underneath the lower control arm here, bottom of the ball joint area, and we've disconnected the two large bolts at the bottom of the strut here. So as soon as we let this jack down, it's going to allow this spring to pop out, and you can see we have this bar right here. This is our safety bar, so this is going to keep that spring seated in here should it want to jump out, or this jack decides to just let loose. We're safe. Minimize any potential damage. So we're going to go ahead here, drop this jack down. This coil spring should fall right out. Then we will remove the top bolt on the strut here. Then that will allow us to remove the strut setup. The spring will be out. Then we'll be able to start installing the coilover. Still a little bit of pressure in there. There we go. One coil spring. So this guy, I didn't think I had isolators on here, but if we actually removed this, the car would have gone down a little bit lower. So this is definitely missing a coil, if not two coils, which is how we had this so low. All right, top of the strut. So we will zip this nut off. We have our Maxim Motorsport caster camber plate. I will hold from below. Make sure you don't drop all your washers, spacers, and that is it. 1 KYB GR2. Definitely not my most favorite strut you could ever use, but that's what I had at the time. I'm just held up. So there's the old suspension setup. Gone. Coilover time. All right, back in action. We had to take a little detour because we forgot one thing that was very important. And we were actually told we needed this part. We got so excited, we started pulling shit apart, and then we didn't have wheels to drive to Home Depot, so we had to walk. So we got our steps in. Long story short, we needed to get some nuts for the top of the strut assembly, and they're a metric, so the ones that work on the KYBs are the ones here. This is a standard thread, actually a fine standard thread. And these are a coarse metric thread. So we went and picked those up. That nut is actually the same thread as the bolt used to hold the strut at the lower side of things. So we just test fit, put everything on. And how do you feel about it?
Oh, golden. Beauty.
So we had actually just put the wheel and tire on just to make sure everything cleared. So it's kind of a mock-up situation. Took a quick measurement.
Upper mounts are good.
So we had to be conscious of the bottom of where the assembly is, where the bearing and all of that plate are mounted, because with the caster camber plates there's actually a bolt, if you remember, that horseshoe looking bracket. So we needed to make sure that we could clear all of that, which we do. And one other interesting thing is that we found out they weren't Max springs, they were my personal favorite actually, a Ford Motorsport C spring. That these are the stiffest coils that you can get. So if you're going to be extremely low, it's good to have an extremely stiff spring, because you definitely don't want a lot of mush and a lot of travel when you're real low. You need it to be stiff. And we were just comparing it against, we think this is what, a sport line?
I think so. It looks like an Eibach.
So it looks like an Eibach, feels like an Eibach, but and this is actually a little bit thinner in terms of its diameter. So you could tell that this would definitely be a softer ride. Both of these are cut. So the C spring cut even more so than the sport line, to give you an idea. And a factory spring would probably be about there. So I'm thinking this is about 2 coils gone. This one's probably a coil and a half gone. But can't be for sure because it happened so long ago. Helper spring is not installed here either. And we took some preliminary measurements. And we got a lot of potential travel here. We're probably going to go down about 1.5 inches to 2 more inches and see what we get. Here's why I don't like KYB GR2s. Shouldn't be able to do that. Alright, so we've done a little bit of trial and error with the coilover setup. We tried not putting the helper springs in, and we ended up having to put them in. So we've done that on the passenger side. We're coming back to the driver's side and doing it. The reason for that is we didn't have enough pressure on the top hat, so the bearing that we were talking about earlier would actually come undone, separate if the car would be jacked up in the air. So obviously we don't want to have to worry about that. So we measured everything on this helper spring. So if you measure, this is about 1/8 of an inch. So all of these compressed down together is 5/8 plus the little bit on the plastic bushing right here. So collectively, we figure that's about 1 inch of height all squished down. So we'll compensate for that on the adjustment level. And the math that we did pretty much has these things cranked all the way down. So that's going to be the fun thing, because we're actually going to see how low is your car if you put your Raceland coilovers to the lowest setting possible. Is that home?
We have a little bit of movement there, not as much as the other side.
So what we're going to do
is push it in so that you get your pre-camber. Well, at least it's even on both sides. Fine, thank you.
Every bit helps, folks. When you go low, that 1/8 of an inch makes all the difference. Make sure you torque properly, just short of a grunt.
Make sure to always do it with your back, not with your knees.
Cable is fucked, officially.
Yeah, it's definitely a toy one.
We're stuck. Officially. Oh, no way.
That's commitment right there.
Okay, we can't go down that road because the dip's too big. Lost our clutch. All clutchless shifting to get us home. And we cannot go
until there.
All right, we lost our clutch, folks. That's it.